Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes here before we get going. All right. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. We're excited to continue the economic resiliency discussion this morning, and this one is going to be focused on tech innovation and the environment as part of our overall Techlandia Summit programming, which will be continuing on for this week. We're going to be really focused throughout Techlandia on trying to improve community outcomes through improved infrastructure and quality of life, efficient service delivery, sustainable and equitable growth, and long-term resilience. My name is Skip Newberry. I'm President and CEO of TAO, and I'll be your facilitator for this conversation, along with Riley O'Brien, Vice President of Events and Experiences. She'll be taking care of much of the back-end coordination for this particular conversation. A couple of rules of engagement as we get started here. All participants have been muted, so please remain on mute unless a TAO staff member unmutes you and calls on you to talk. You may ask or respond to questions in the chat box publicly or privately by directing your message to me or TAO admin, and we'll monitor the chat box and respond throughout the discussion. We'll ask you all to engage via the participant icon, and that'll appear on your screen. So we also want you to encourage you to follow us on social media as well. During the session, we're excited to share what's happening throughout the conference and to get participant takeaways from our events. So this session is also going to be recorded, and it'll be posted on TAO's YouTube channel within about 24 hours of the session. A big thank you again to all the investors in the Techlandia Summit. We appreciate their support, and we're excited to explore the topic today of economic resiliency. And we'll also have some sessions going on as well on the future of work, human factors, and mobility throughout the week. Finally, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists for this session. So we have Greg Goloborodko. I always have a tough time getting the last name completely out, and sorry if I butchered it, Greg. And he's a senior project manager for manufacturing, sector lead, America's Promise lead, as well with WorkSystems, Inc. And also Jereme Monteau is the CTO and co-founder of OuterSpatial, which is a Bend-based startup company that got its start here in the Portland area. So we're excited to have you both. And we're going to have Jereme kick it off first, and then we'll switch over to Greg. So let's see, Riley, can we shift over control of the desktop so that Jereme can take it away from here? Perfect.
Here we go. Okay. Looks like I'm unmuted. Is my screen visible?
All good.
Okay, let's see. If I full screen it, are we still okay?
Yes.
Okay.
I think.
Fantastic.
Hang on.
Yeah, okay.
Oh. All right.
Good to go?
I don't see your screen anymore.
Oh, maybe at the full screen. So here. Better now? Oh, here we go. Let me see. Got it. How about now?
There we go.
Cool.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. Super excited to be a part of the talk this morning. My name is Jereme Monteau, and I'm the co-founder and CTO of OuterSpatial. And I threw together a couple slides. I think I can get through these pretty quickly, and then we can just move on to the conversation part. But I wanted to give everybody an idea of what we're up to at OuterSpatial in terms of how it relates to people interacting with the natural environment for outdoor recreation and other reasons. Talk a little bit about some of the things we have going on specifically in the Portland area and here in Central Oregon. I'll touch on some things we're seeing in terms of sustainable trail systems and how that relates to economic resiliency and public health and the social components of getting outside. And then really quickly, I'll just mention what we've seen in sort of the new world that we're in, living with COVID. So yeah, really quickly, again, I'm Jereme Monteau. I helped start a company called OuterSpatial a few years back. I grew up in Alaska, spent 16 years in the Bay Area, and 5 years ago, we relocated to Bend. So what is OuterSpatial? So we are a mobile app focused on getting people outside and making that experience outside as engaging and as accessible as possible. We are a mobile platform for organizations. What we do is we empower public agencies and land managers and their nonprofit partners to publish their authentic content to visitors about their regions that they manage, so that both the residents of the area and potentially tourists or visitors to the area can have the best possible information that they need to get outside. What makes our platform a little different from other sort of apps that you might be familiar with in the outdoor space, like All Trails or Hip Camp or The Dirt, is that we focus primarily on that authentic content coming directly from the land managers. And we're a little more focused on an inclusive and accessible experience that captures sort of the whole outdoors, not just what you might typically find on social media in terms of the extreme adventures where it's a 5-day backpacking trip or climbing a mountain, which is great. We love all of those things, but we also wanted to create something that was easier for everybody to engage with and more inclusive. The last thing is that we have a very visible stewardship model in everything we do, so that the organizations involved in the outdoor experience receive the recognition that they deserve. And so hopefully the public can start making that connection between those organizations and those places. And they can start showing their support in many ways besides just getting outside. So taking that specifically to the Portland region, actually, our first customer in sort of the lifetime of our company was the Intertwine Alliance, which hopefully folks are familiar with. And we helped them bring an application called Daycation to the Portland region. And this is an application that's focused primarily on families for getting outside and sort of enjoying what's right there potentially in their neighborhoods, and experiences that connect sort of the urban landscape with the natural landscape. So potentially enjoying a park plus maybe a place to grab a bite to eat, or a place to pick up some great chocolate or another great product that might be made there in Portland. So this app was a collaboration between the the Intertwine Alliance, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they've brought on board Waste Management as a sponsor. So this is one thing that we really try and focus on, is in a given region, getting the different organizations to collaborate to bring something valuable to residents and visitors for the whole region. We're doing something similar here, where Visit Bend has signed on to sort of sponsor a license to OuterSpatial to bring all of the Central Oregon information to visitors and residents. So it's sort of a combination of serving tourists and residents with the same resource. And Visit Bend is a destination marketing organization. But they also work very closely with the local parks, as well as the Forest Service, to make sure they're communicating the best possible information to folks that want to enjoy the resource in Central Oregon. So this is, I'll point out, this is sort of happening at both a neighborhood scale, so something that you might be able to do right outside your back door, or visiting a different part of your town that you've never been to, or at the regional scale. So maybe going into a national forest or going out to a wilderness area. So we like to provide opportunities that sort of span the whole spectrum of the outdoors. One interesting thing that we're starting to see more and more is these trails sort of popping up that you might have called in the past sort of walking tours. And in the San Francisco Bay Area, they've launched this Crosstown trail, which sort of runs diagonally across the entire sort of 7 mile by 7 mile San Francisco peninsula. And this is a really exciting way for the public sort of engage with San Francisco and the landscape in a little different way across this route that goes across the whole city and utilizes existing trails, as well as just routes across the pedestrian network as well. And, you know, along the way, they might interact with the natural environment, but then they're going to be also going by a ton of businesses and other parts of the city. So integrating both the outdoors and the urban environment in some really compelling ways. So when it comes to sort of economic sustainability and social sustainability, there's a group here in Bend, based in Bend, called the Deschutes Trails Coalition that has launched a project to help the land managers and the trail builders evaluate and locate new trails. And they've developed a sort of 4 pillars of sustainability. And when I thought of this talk, I thought it was interesting that they have sort of added economic and social pillars to the more traditional environment and physical aspects of sustainability that land managers have used in the past. So, you know, economics and sort of social connection is, you know, it's something that's being built into the outdoor recreation experience by the land managers now. And they're building a dashboard to see very visually how the sustainability of a given route might be impacted by those economic and social components. So it's an exciting sort of movement we're seeing starting here. And this is something that will start here, and then they're very interested in scaling nationally eventually. So last thing I'll mention is the way that we've seen COVID sort of impact, you know, our relationship with the natural world, and sort of the urgency that we've seen in having a good connection to nature and having access to these places where we can recreate and get outside. And so this was a Google Trend graph that we had created that sort of shows kind of what has happened in terms of people's intentions and interests as a result of the pandemic. And you know, people searching for movie times in yellow, you know, clearly has declined, while searches for open parks, hiking trails, and bike trails has sort of replaced that demand over the last 3 months, 3-4 months in response. So, you know, we're seeing what has resulted is this is a sort of the amount of interaction that people are having with our apps. And so as you can see in May, all of a sudden there was a huge spike in demand for good information about what you can do outside. So really, you know, interesting times we're living in, and it's become clear that the value of the outdoors and having it be connected to where you're living and being able to get to both what's in your backyard, but then potentially you know, out into the broader area has become very urgent and important to people. And so, yeah, we're excited to help out with that and see where it goes. So maybe I'll stop it there.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeremy. That was a great overview, and not surprising that we're seeing a huge interest or uptick in interest in outdoor activities and escapes. It's important mentally and also just for diversion for folks as they're dealing with social distancing and stay-at-home orders over the last several months. So one thing that's interesting is as we transition to Greg, about I'd say 7 years ago, we did this study of a bunch of different technology professionals in the greater Portland area, and this was administered by an urban planning department or class at Portland State University. And the conversation was around why tech workers choose to locate here or start their careers here. And not surprisingly, access to environmental amenities was one of the top things that drove their interest in this region. And so as we're thinking about, the focus around talent, especially as it relates to some of the traded sector industries that are going to serve as a competitive advantage, if you will, for this region, one thing the Northwest is known for is obviously clean technology as well. And so we're fortunate to have Greg here from WorkSystems, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the trends that he's seeing in terms of the workforce or talent side of this. And then what we'll do is we'll have a chance to have some Q&A among both Jeremy and Greg to talk a little bit about some of the various intersection points between the environment on the one hand, the clean tech sector on the other, and then also the focus on job creation and opportunity here in the region. And of course, later in the week, we're going to have an opportunity to report back on any sort of projects or policies that we may have a chance to discuss or explore that we may be wanting to move forward in the coming months. And so that's the purpose of the breakout session following this. We'll have about an hour where we can talk about, for example, some of the work that OuterSpatial is doing, some of the work that some of the other companies that are in the area have been focused on as it relates to using technology to connect people to different environmental but other types of assets in the region. So we hope that many of you will be able to join us for that discussion as well. And without further ado, I want to turn the floor over to Greg so he can provide us with some insight in what he's seeing on the workforce question, and then we'll do Q&A after that.
Great. Thank you so much, Skip. I really appreciate it. Can everybody hear me on this okay? Awesome. So I really appreciate having a couple of minutes this morning of everyone's time. So I'm Greg Goloborodko. Skippy did great on the last name earlier, by the way, so I really appreciate it. I am the manufacturing sector lead, as well as I actually recently took over for Kay Ishida at WorkSystems, who's transitioned to other projects. So I am actually the tech sector lead now for the last month as well. So it's really interesting to see the crossover between the manufacturing space as well as the tech space, because I think there's a lot of opportunity there. WorkSystems is the local workforce board for the Portland metro region. Some of you are familiar with us, others we might be new to you. In essence, we are the conduit between the public and private sector, between the training providers and the job seekers for our region, in order to provide opportunities for trainings, for resources, for supports for job seekers, in order to get into full-time unsubsidized employment. We currently have a number of different funding streams within the Portland metro area to support job seekers around their training needs. Now, typically we primarily have funding for new workers as opposed to existing workers, which is called incumbent worker. Right now with COVID, we've actually restructured some of our grant funding in order to help with some layoff aversion to help employers just kind of maintain some of their talent and really focusing on how they can grow that talent in-house because they understand they're under very unique circumstances. So what we have seen from the private sector, from the employer community specifically, as of the last couple of months, really with COVID, having to pivot their entire workforce model, they're looking at a lot of cross-training. A lot of businesses that have reached out to us, they're not necessarily looking to hire new staff. What they're looking to do is maintain the current staff they have, finish out the contracts they have, the production schedules, etc. But really, they want to cross-train their staff to make them more marketable. And so what we're seeing is a lot of really outside the box ideas in terms of the kinds of trainings that employers are seeking now that we haven't seen in the past, at least through various grants that we have and through different sectors. a lot of online security, a lot of CompTIA Plus, AW, Python, a lot of PMP certification, communication skills, working remotely. Those are the kinds of things that we're getting a lot of requests right now from employers, which is really fascinating to see them engaging with their workforce and understanding that the future workforce will be working substantially differently for the foreseeable future. So it's really exciting to us to be able to really support those employers in the context of, we may have some funding to help you with getting some of your staff cross-trained. You then, as the employer, can invest those resources into your company and to make sure these individuals have the proper, obviously, pay scale. They're on a proper pay scale. They have the benefits they need. They're not laid off, right? So we covered the training costs, and then those employers can maintain their staff, who then become more marketable. On the clean tech side, this has been really interesting because this is actually something that WorkSystems has been focusing on for several years now, in just kind of preliminary conversations around where the opportunity lies for us in the Portland metro area. We actually have follow-up conversations I do later this week with PGE, and together there's a small group of employers in the Portland market who are talking, we're talking like Daimler, Boeing, companies of that nature, that are really looking at how they can take advantage of the current technology needs that exist within our community. So for instance, like the charging stations for electric vehicles, can we go ahead and have some kind of a talent pipeline in order to support the skills that are needed for maintaining those stations? Can we somehow put that into the K-12 system? Can we somehow look at maybe on-ramps for how we can best train individuals to go into maintaining those stations? Because what those companies are finding now is a lot of that work is being done by licensed electricians that PGE is having to contract because there just isn't that skill. So right now they're looking at, okay, a lot of what these technicians have to do, they're actually doing on different pieces of equipment, on computers, on laptops, on handheld tablets of sorts in the field. But a lot of the training for that, actually, they do remotely in-house anyway. So the employers such as PGE, the utility, is coming to us and looking at what are the opportunities for us to get these folks excited about these positions early on? How can we maybe get this into the K-12 system model earlier so we can have these students actually aware that these technologies, these positions exist? Are there internship opportunities that we might be able to provide in order to connect them early on and get them excited about these roles? So COVID, amazingly enough, while yes, it's been detrimental to certain parts of the workforce, in other sectors, it's really opened up kind of these doors of opportunity and potential for us in terms of how some employers are thinking around how best to support their future workforce needs and their current projects, which has been really exciting to see. So now some of the challenges for us have been around the training provider side because, you know, as a workforce board, we use our established training providers. So this would be like the Portland community colleges, some of the state schools, some of the for-profit training providers, et cetera. But a lot of the skills that we've been supporting in the past require a lot of person-to-person contact. They require in-lab or, you know, present kind of training. So now those training providers are having to pivot a lot of their modules to an online system. And that's created a little bit of a delay in timing because maybe they didn't have the technology already set up or the ability or the capacity to move their trainings exclusively online. So what we're actually seeing is some employers are now advising some of our training providers on what are the really critical skills they need and how those training providers can really get situated much quicker. And then we can kind of fill in the blanks as we go along. So at least they're trying to get the, you know, the structure, the meat and bones of this really out into the world so that that can at least support both the job seeker and the business entity as a whole. So I think I've spoken for long enough. Skip, I'm going to turn it over to you and see if there was anything else I missed on that.
Make sure I'm off mute here. Okay, yeah, so just one thing that'd be interesting to get your thoughts on is, you know, what are you seeing in terms of, and this could be more sort of medium term, but, you know, since like the last recession, what has happened to demand for what might be described as sort of clean tech jobs in the Portland area? Have you seen sort of some different trends emerge over that time period that you know would be interesting and worth sharing in terms of benchmarking?
So it's an interesting question, and I think part of it I'm going to have to punt until a future time so I can get a better answer for you. Because having just taken over this position, I'm getting a lot of information tossed at me, so I'm learning a lot. I apologize. So I do want to follow up with Kay and our LMI data folks just to confirm some of the points that I wanted to bring up. I know one of the things I've seen since COVID and even a little before that was we've had a lot of employers who have reached out to us and either through WorkSystems, through Prosper Portland, through other channels, so to speak, to get a sense of where there might be opportunities for collaboration. So a lot of companies that maybe wouldn't have considered themselves as a clean tech or a partner within that space, they're trying to figure out how they could actually plug into that and how they could be a little more responsive in the community, a little bit better of a community steward and a member as a whole. So we have seen those conversations. We've also seen a lot of folks really when they're looking at talent, and again, this was pre-COVID, which this is where it kind of gets a little tricky. Pre-COVID, a lot of employers were looking at, we're having a hard time finding trained, eligible talent. So how can we develop this internally? And so a lot of them have really started building out networks, relationships, community meetups and gatherings where they can network and really get a sense of where that future wave of workforce comes from. So employers, from what the conversations that we were getting, plugged into, they were being a little more creative in terms of how they were sourcing that talent, and they were being a little more responsive and listening to the future workforce in terms of what they were interested in seeing in an employer also. So it was a little more, I don't want to say it was kind of individuals interviewing both sides, but it kind of got to that point. Both the employer and the employee potentially were interviewing each other in that sense. And the conversations were really around how we can best tap into resources that we may not have otherwise been plugged into. Where are those opportunity gaps? We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are some programs, for instance, that are in the Clackamas County region that the Portland Metro folks refer to all the time because they're there. We have it already existent. It's a close partner of ours, so why not? So really those partnerships are really what we saw a lot more engagement and collaboration around as of recent too.
And on the partnerships side of things, especially as it relates to some of the training and reskilling and upskilling, it seems like if anything, the crisis that we're in now has caused companies to think about in an even more accelerated fashion, how do they retrain and reskill both existing employees, but also how can they provide access to training for people who want to quickly get into a dynamic field? And obviously technology and clean technology is pretty dynamic. So I'm wondering, what are some of the things that you're seeing in terms of potential partnerships with community colleges in the area? And what should people be aware of in terms of what those types of organizations offer in the way of capabilities to companies?
Yeah, so great question. So on the community college side, with our training providers as a whole, actually, a lot of them right now are taking the summer, and really they've taken the spring as well, the vast majority of it, because classes were all moved to online. They've all been looking at how they can still provide content, provide the value add to the community, to the business community and the workforce community in a way that everyone benefits. And so right now, during the summertime, I know that PCC, for instance, as well as Mount Hood and Clackamas Community College and some of our local colleges, what they're looking at is how they can provide content with businesses specifically. So they're trying to almost do a pre-apprenticeship or an apprenticeship model, an internship model, where maybe there's a little bit of time for individuals as they're doing training to also get some hands-on time in the employer space. But at the same time, they're trying to be cognizant regarding the social distancing guidelines and the PPE requirements, obviously. So they're really looking at, okay, how can we still make sure that these individual trainees receive the hands-on training so they're not going to get delayed in getting certified, getting credentialed, etc. How can we make sure they're still getting that? And who are some of the partners in the space that maybe we haven't pinged in the past? So there's a lot more talk right now that we're seeing, at least between some of our public workforce system partners, so the community colleges, actually talking more to private training providers to figure out who's got the equipment, who's got the staffing capacity, so they can leverage one another's space or talent or skill set, that's really exciting. So they're really trying to do a little less of competition and a lot more of collaboration right now, which is really exciting, I think, all around. Now, the other thing that we've seen is This actually came through on an OMAP call with the Oregon Manufacturing Extension Partnership, which I know Tao is also connected with. This came through. There were actually a couple of employers that signed on to a resource call with them, and during the course of the natural conversation and some of the chat features that were going on, there were two employers that realized that one had a need that the other could perfectly match without any kind of financial incentive or otherwise. And it just so happened that OMAP was kind of the conduit, that brought those two entities onto the same platform. But one company was looking at a specific type of PPE that they were requiring for their employees and the type of facility they had. And we had another manufacturer that was on that call that had literally just retrofitted their entire production line in order to start producing this type of PPE. So this was a situation of this was natural synergy. It just so happened where these two partners were here, and neither one of those two manufacturers was actually somebody that even engaged with OMEP before. This was kind of a situation where they thought, you know what, things are a little different in the workspace. We have to think a little differently of how we can be a good steward in this community. So let's look at what resources OMAP is offering. Maybe there might be something for us, an opportunity to engage further. And all of a sudden, it just so happened they were like a lifesaver. They were the lifeline for another business partner. So now both of those businesses are very intimately engaged. They've also joined our manufacturing panel on the WorkSystems side, which is great. So now they're looking at, okay, what other resources are in the community? How can we assist? But also, how can we plug in so we can get a benefit for us because we have workers to support too? So I think right now it's just a lot of folks are doing a lot more research online. They're looking at online platforms as the way to keep their production levels at least sustainable, but more importantly, keep their workers safe. So I think they're really trying to balance those two, and at the same time, really looking at opportunities of where they can come together and not necessarily have to reinvent the wheel, like we said, but really just utilize each other's strengths and really lean on those a little heavier than before. So we've seen a lot of really unique relationships from healthcare partners to manufacturing production companies right now being formed, again, for that PPE component. But it's just so great because those are relationships that are being established naturally right now, given the circumstances we're in. And our hope and our intent is really to just foster that and build upon that over time.
Yep. Yeah, that's really cool to hear about that level of collaboration. And I'm wondering, so I have one more question, then we'll shift to Jereme for a little bit. But, on the topic of online delivery and sort of inclusion or access as it relates to making sure that in this virtual environment, people get access to training and education resources. Are you seeing efforts by the higher ed partners and maybe even some of the companies or corporations that are involved in this in looking at ways that they can get more training to folks in an online format? And I was wondering if you could speak to what are some of the potential challenges with that, but also where have there been some sort of causes for optimism?
Yeah, awesome question. So I think this is probably one of my favorite things right now, where I'm seeing that some of our companies are trying to keep their staff trained. They're trying to keep them motivated. Some have had to, unfortunately, furlough or lay off folks, but they're still trying to provide resources and opportunities for them. So that workforce potentially is available when the hiring kind of resumes back up a little bit. What we're seeing is, so technology needs are definitely a barrier for some of our workers, more so than others. For the employer front, I mean, depending on the type of space, the type of position that the employer is looking to support, some are more reasonable and more realistic, I guess, to even offer that kind of support than others. So, for instance, in the healthcare space, a lot of our CNAs, some of the RNs even, some of the LPNs, those healthcare occupations that maybe have seen a reduction in hours because they obviously can't have the person-to-person contact based on certain restrictions in counties and state. A lot of those individuals have been allowed to work from home. They've been doing CE training, actually continuing ed training, in order to maintain their certification and licensure. The challenge becomes that not all of those individuals may have the technology at home, such as the computer, the high-speed internet capabilities, et cetera. So what we've seen, actually, Multnomah County, this is actually a really interesting one because this was a public partner that did this. Multnomah County, actually, for the staff on the healthcare teams who had to stay home because of COVID, because of restrictions, that needed to continue on with their training, Multnomah County actually provided the technology for all of their staff. They were able to, and I'm not sure exactly how they secured this, but they were able to secure all the laptops and somehow provide the actual bandwidth access for all of their employees in order to access that. So they could continue learning, they can continue training, and so they're still just as marketable and valuable upon return, upon reopening or a gradual reopening, right? With some of our community-based organizations, we've had to basically put out an ask the community to see where we can source maybe some of the resources that we need, some of the technology needs. So I know that Free Geek actually has a really great program where they'll, if you donate a computer to them, they'll refurbish it and they'll donate it to somebody in need. We have partnered several of our community organizations, whether it be URCO, Northwest Family Services, you name it, in the Portland Metro. And we also have partnered with some school districts. And we've actually been able to connect, I mean, hundreds, if not over 1,000 folks in the Portland Metro area with the computers that they need in order to do online trainings. And we know that some of those individuals, while they're receiving our services through the WorkSource system, some of them could still be underemployed because maybe they've had their hours cut. So we know that these are folks who are connected to our systems. And we're trying to figure out, well, you know, they need this current support right now. How long do they need it for? How long can we continue supporting this for? What kind of financial resources will that require of us? And so as this continues, as we're, you know, constantly evolving, we're looking at, you know, what other state revenue streams are available to us in order to provide this on a higher level. We've reached out to some of our local manufacturers, such as Tektronix and Intel as well, to see if they can possibly provide some technology, because they do have computers that they actually donate to our school districts during certain events for use. So we know that there's technology that is being underutilized there. So we've made that ask, and we have gotten some machines, which is great. So it's really just, we're in a space right now where we're trying to figure out how best to support the needs of the job seeker and the employee that maybe has been dislocated for the short term, but also in a way where the employers are seeing the benefits. So I think a lot of our conversation is being driven by the employer needs, where they're letting us know what kind of trainings are valuable to them. How can this skill set benefit their company and more so their employee when they return? So we're trying to be as responsive to that. So we're not putting additional barriers or additional components onto this funding where it's like, hey, this doesn't quite meet the spirit of the grant. This really doesn't meet the training outcomes. No, we're trying to be as responsive to our community so that, you know, some of these dollars that maybe have been more restrictive in the past, we're trying to be as open and transparent with, because we understand that the immediate need could be substantial if we can have an impact on that today. So we're trying to be as responsive. We're looking at outside resources. We're trying to reallocate some of our program staff, myself included. I came from a healthcare and manufacturing focus. Now I'm in the tech space and manufacturing focus. So it's really great to look at how we can, you know, just kind of leverage each other's strengths. But at the same time, we're trying to figure out in the community, we know that there are businesses that have resources that maybe they're just not sure how to plug them in to help other partners. So we're trying to be that conduit. We're trying to be that matchmaker in part. And that has been really the feedback that we've gotten from employers, that's been really beneficial and supporting to them.
Excellent. So Jereme, one of the questions that came up was, you know, in terms of employers, we've been hearing, frankly, from a lot of our members about their concern for like the health and wellness of their employees, especially since people are, you know, they've been at home for months now, and sometimes not everyone has necessarily the opportunity for diversions or change of pace or scene. And so they're looking at different ways they can actually help provide resources to those employees, both in terms of information, but also tools that can help them kind of get out, right? Whether in the figurative sense or literally physically. And so I'm wondering, do you see much opportunity going forward for OuterSpatial in terms of working directly with companies that are looking to kind of provide resources like this to their employees? And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Corporate wellness, you know, is something that's definitely sort of risen in the last 10 years, certainly. And yeah, now in the last 4 months, it's become an even bigger issue as everybody is, you know, working from wherever they live or, you know, a place that they can get to close by, not necessarily everybody moving, you know, sort of commuting into an office and then figuring out what to do around their campus. I think there are some big opportunities for companies to encourage their employees to just get out of their house or, you know, in their own neighborhoods and seek out the information about what might be in their own backyards. And certainly our platform can be a way for them to do that. You know, we working with the public agencies, the public agencies and the cities, like they want for their communities to be livable, and they design the infrastructure, both the transportation networks and the layout of the parks, in order for everybody to have the same opportunity to get outside, sort of no matter where they live. There's a big shift towards that now in terms of equity, and I think that's only going to help when it comes to the corporate context in terms of either the region that I'm moving to work in, or the area that the company campus happens to be in. Eventually, if as people do start returning to actual physical places to work, knowing they're going to be used to being able to get outside and on a regular basis, and they want that to continue when they're on the job as well. So certainly huge opportunities there. And we've designed OuterSpatial kind of from the beginning to be a place where organizations can create content for their visitors. So to this point, we focused on, the land manager creating content for their audience, but we've experimented with allowing companies or other businesses in an area creating content to go alongside what's coming from the land managers, that might speak more directly to their communities or their organizations. So it can be sort of location-based information. So if you're working in a particular company, here are the things that you can do nearby, or here are the things you can do that other employees are doing, for example. So, we have a lot of hope that by creating a single place that people can collaborate in terms of outdoor recreation, we'll see all kinds of different things happening there.
And I'm wondering how much of the community that you've developed in terms of the online tool gives you insight into, what people would do in the future, right? So like if there were this type of infrastructure or this type of access from a mobility standpoint, I would love to access this particular local park or this particular like urban, greenway or whatever. Yep. And so do you think that, one of the sort of opportunities here could be to provide more intelligence, if you will, from a predictive standpoint to the cities and agencies you're working with, so they can get a better handle on what demand would look like if a few factors were changed?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a huge one. It's really interesting to see, you think about like an outdoor application. The vast majority of the time those applications are being used at home, right, to find something to do or to just look at something that they just did. And so seeing where people are physically located versus what they're looking at going to do or what their interest is, can lead to some views that might allow for better decision making in terms of, hey, if I'm interested in a particular experience, you may have heard about an experience that's far away from where you are, or learned about it on social media, but pointing out to them also that, hey, that a similar experience is available to you within 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes of where you are. That's a huge opportunity. And understanding, so now with the public health components, understanding the patterns in terms of time of day, what's going to be busy on the weekends versus what's busy during the week, all of that information about what people are interested in doing, when they want to do it, who they want to do it with, why they're doing it, right? Some people are looking for a social experience versus a solitary experience, right? And we know that different places are better for those kinds of experiences, and it changes over time. So yeah, right now the way that people discover where to go and what they can do there is it's driven more by popularity and sort of what content can really grab their attention, because a lot of the business models are around capturing attention, right, and selling advertising. And so what that is leading to is sort of an overcrowding of the top 10 lists. So, and then sort of exclusion of a lot of other great resources. So we have an opportunity to help the community balance visitation across the resource so that you don't see these big impacts in like a very small number of places, and then other places that sort of struggle to get attention and are undervalued. So that's a big part of why we do what we do, is to enable that going forward.
Yeah, like the concept of essentially like load balancing, if you will, across the entire system. I mean, that was a good question, I think, raised by Mary Ann, who's in the audience, about like tech runs the risk of potentially, you know, just creating a massive amount of demand for something, and then the resource is overwhelmed. And I think that's an interesting thing here, is that, you know, the environment, and as compelling as it is here in the Northwest, is a finite resource. And so as much as it's a competitive advantage in terms of, you know, its existence here, in terms of attracting and retaining talent, it's also something that, you know, if not safeguarded or protected and maintained, would diminish over time, and it's no longer as compelling. And so we've got obviously a lot of population growth going on in the Northwest right now, and so this is a very sort of real concern. And I'm wondering what sort of trends you've seen in terms of COVID-19. You've definitely alluded to it, that there is more of a focus on local. And I'm wondering what you're seeing in terms of usage, because you saw a lot of searches for open spaces. What about what you're seeing from your customers in terms of how many people are actually showing up on trails using different environmental amenities?
That's a good question. I don't know that we're seeing any specific patterns develop in terms of people showing up in specific places. Just that the information that was valuable to them before is like supercharged valuable now, right? Like all of a sudden the what's open and what's not open, and sort of where are there one-way trails versus two-way trails. That is an interesting component that we've seen in terms of specific locations, and the parks using some of the information or using their trail networks to sort of route people in a different way. So turning some trail sections into one-way versus two-way, and then communicating that back out to the public so that you know, they know, depending on where they're going, that hey, you may have used this trail as a two-way trail before, but now it's a one-way trail. And just the public health component of that being kind of what has created the urgency there is really interesting, because you see the agencies and our customers, they've been trying to sort of shape the traffic of people to places for all kinds of different reasons over, you know, since they've managed the resource, and primarily to avoid user conflicts. So between different user groups, so equestrian versus mountain biking versus pedestrian, you know, trying to manage all these different groups, utilizing the same physical places in some ways, and making sure that everybody has a good experience in a shared place. And that sort of speaks to some of the education question. And, you know, people are looking for something to do outside, and when they Google search that the educational content isn't the first thing that pops up, right? It's the really big, the photo, the compelling photo of a great view, and, you know, something to pull them in and just to keep clicking. But what we see is that now giving the agencies a voice on mobile lets them deliver the information that you have to have, like where things are and what you can do there, alongside the information that will help you have a better experience and will help everybody have a better experience in terms of how you should treat the place that you're in, and how to behave in certain situations. Not everybody knows the yield protocols on trails. So when a bike is coming, or a pedestrian is coming, or a horse is coming, what do you do? Like who goes where, right? And, you know, that's just one component, but, you know, the leave no trace is another big component. And now the public health aspects are a big component of making sure that people have good content about these either cultural or environmental practices that are there to try to preserve a good experience for all the groups that are out there. Because, I mean, we know that this resource is very valuable to everybody, and people are going to continue to go out, and areas will become impacted, and we don't want to stop that. We actually want to encourage that. And like you said earlier, if we have an opportunity to sort of load balance people across all the lands, that can help with ensuring that good experience, no matter who you are or where you're going.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Shifting to, we've got about 7-8 minutes or so. This is a question that I think would be interesting to pose both to you and to Greg. Is we look at the environment as this really kind of compelling piece of infrastructure in a sense, right? It's an asset that the region has. One thing we've been looking at in terms of this conference is what are some of the things that could result in new company formation and startup activity as it relates to key pieces of infrastructure. And so thinking about the environment, what's interesting is OuterSpatial is a perfect example of a company that is serving as a bridge, if you will, between environmental assets on the one hand and government and sort of the local sort of public sector stewards, if you will, of many of these assets, and providing them with more information as they make policy decisions. And I think there's an interesting opportunity here as we look at things like how do you inspire people to pursue clean tech jobs? Well, you expose them to the natural beauty that exists all around us, right? But do so in a thoughtful way where they're not overwhelming it. And then it's a matter of getting them into the pipeline that Greg and WorkSystems and others are responsible for in terms of getting them the skills they need, to be able to have careers in clean tech and technology. And a lot of what we've heard from folks that are very much focused on those jobs is that it's mission driven, and there's no bigger crisis that we face in terms of humanity than the climate crisis. Every single mayor of most major cities in the world will say their biggest concern in terms of what keeps them up at night is something related to climate change, right? Whether it's, too much water, not enough water, fires, population growth and not enough resources in terms of food locally. And so it's all kind of connected in that sense. And I'm wondering if both of you could comment on where do you see opportunities in terms of our environmental assets here in terms of new company formation? So I'll give one example that was raised in a session on Friday just to kind of seed the conversation. So there's electrification going on among a lot of bus fleets. And here in Portland, there's been talk about TriMet potentially electrifying its buses as well. That presents a whole bunch of opportunities for companies to form and supply a variety of technology and products that help enable that. So what are some of the things that, Jereme, maybe you see as an opportunity here, and then maybe we can have Greg finish it up for us.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think so the transportation component I think is really interesting. I think there are opportunities to move people or enable transportation systems that connect people to the outdoors. We had started our journey by creating a thing called Transit and Trails that was designed to help people get outside without getting in their cars, just using existing public transportation networks. And I think there are still opportunities there in sort of providing new ways or new services that help people get to where they want to go in terms of an outdoor experience, especially on the accessibility side. So connecting communities or people that traditionally have there have been barriers, physical and non-physical barriers to a good outdoor experience. So I think there's a lot of creative thinking to be done there, for sure. Yeah, there's the other thing that I'm really excited about that we really need and that might be unlocked by the sort of shift in jobs is data. And sort of our physical infrastructure, has been in place for, hundreds of years now in some places, but the data infrastructure is only 10 years old, 30 years old, and collecting data, especially in the outdoors, can be challenging for the agency. So I'm really curious about somebody figuring out a better data collection strategy. And they're in Portland. The Dirt is based in Portland, and they came up with a really interesting model around how do you incentivize people to collect data around campsites. I think there's a big opportunity in that area of how can you either through an app or even through physical training programs about how do you actually go out and collect data on the trail or in a location using off-the-shelf consumer technologies plus some new platform or some new technology that brings that all together in a really easy to use way. So yeah, I think some sort of a public works program on the data side would be really interesting, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for companies to tackle that as well. So just a couple spots that I see.
Very cool. All right, Greg?
Yeah, I think that was a fantastic point. And actually, I was going to bring up the TriMet example because they're one of our partners around the electrifying vehicles piece of it. I think that's definitely spot on. It's not something that I've had too much discussion outside of TriMet on because we've had PGE, TriMet, Daimler, they've all been at the table to have that conversation locally. In terms of others going on, I think that's something I'd like to come back to you guys with a little more concrete examples of. I know that, from the workforce standpoint, though, especially the talent development piece, we have in all 4 of our targeted sector plans, we have talent development in terms of pipeline development as a key core component of one of our key strategies for really promoting these occupations, promoting these sectors to our future workforce. One of the things, though, that I know has been extremely successful in our healthcare space, as well as some of our construction space and manufacturing, is really getting these kids to understand what transferable skills are, getting some hands-on activities to them, getting them in front of opportunities where they can see themselves in these roles and also see individuals who are like them in these roles so they can actually foresee themselves a little closer. So what we do is a lot of career exploration work with our K-12 partners. So whether it's Hillsborough School District, Beaverton, PPS, David Douglas, etc. We try to come up with as much career exploration work, try to come up with as many activities for kids so they can get a sense of what a day in the life really would look like. We have resources that we've actually put together for that demographic, as well as maybe a slightly older audience, which is careersnw.org. That talks about career exploration within our 4 targeted sectors and what some of the key track occupations are within them. It talks about the necessary education requirements, the skills, the pay ranges, etc. So it's a really good way for individuals to kind of see themselves in those roles over time. But at the end of the day, we're still having a hard time, competing with kids, getting it in their minds that, hey, the gig economy, while yes, it helps in some spaces, it's not for everyone and it's not for everything. So really getting them to understand that there are some occupations that we just can't automate away right now, that can't be, substituted out, is really critical. So they can kind of get a sense of what proper work ethic looks like, what, hard work, dedication, attention to detail, communication skills, what those look like. Because, at the end of the day, whether your job is going to be remote, whether it's going to be still in person once again, there's still going to be a requirement for those soft skills. We need to make sure that you understand, how to work with groups, how to work with different personalities, and then make sure that, it's a job that really fits within your skill set, within your interests. So for us on the workforce end, the earlier we can get in front of youth and in front of a job seeker that is kind of considering what their options are or looking at different choices, the sooner we can expose them to various career pathways that have upward mobility and that have really great growth attached to them, which we can justify using historical data, which we have our economists for. The earlier we can get them excited about those things and get some kind of hands-on activities, that's really where we see the most value add. That's where we see the most bang for our buck, the ROI come in. So I think, whether it's clean tech, whether it's, other sectors as a whole, I think the trick for us in this space, whether it's COVID or outside of that, is how can we make these jobs attractive to these individuals? How do we incentivize them to go into these tracks? Because we know that, on the clean tech side, there is a long-term benefit to this, but some of our job seekers, unfortunately, are more stuck in the you know, hey, I need to put food on my table today. And that immediate need obviously is going to supersede anything that is a long-term plan. So we're trying to, from the workforce end, try to see what other resources we can bring into the fold so they can focus on appropriate trainings that they need for long-term. And in the short term, we can help them out maybe with housing, with transportation, with those support services, so they can truly be focused on that long-term stability and sustainability piece. So hopefully that answered your questions.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it reminds me of an organization we've done some work with in the past called the Blueprint Foundation locally, that's been helping to get kids exposed to environmental careers and kind of the skills they need in an applied sense to be competitive. So I want to say thank you to both Jereme and Greg for joining us. We're going to have a breakout session. We have an hour if we need it. But the idea there is to talk about things like OuterSpatial. I will be hearing from a company too that is going to be able to do a little bit of a demo for us. That's an interesting tech solution that helps, I think, engage people again in a number of interesting ways. And so we'll be exploring what are some of the ways similar to OuterSpatial that this potential solution could connect people in neighborhoods and other parts of communities to local government and neighborhood-based resources and vice versa. And I think what we're hearing here is that there's definitely an opportunity in the region from a project standpoint to be thinking about some of the regional data assets that exist here from the public standpoint, and then what are the technology layers that need to help facilitate that in terms of people getting access to the information and insight that the data is generating. And so it also enables good policy making on the public sector side. So anyway, there's some interesting opportunities. We're going to explore some more of that. Again, thank you to Jereme and Greg. Jereme, hopefully you can stick around a little bit, and Greg, you're welcome to as well in this next session. We'll also be potentially thinking about some different policies that could come out of this. And as we think about sort of this next opportunity, I first wanted to mention that in the next 45 to 50 minutes, we're going to be trying to think about what are some of the potential projects that are ongoing or resources that are currently in place that we might want to focus our attention on, because at the end of the week on Friday, we have a chance in the morning to do a report out from each of the different micro summits. So economic resiliency will do one, mobility, human factors, and also future of work. And essentially, there'll be a chance to pitch those ideas, if you will, not only to folks who are local, but also we're going to have a number of Global City Teams Challenge supercluster network leads, which a supercluster network is essentially a policy area like mobility and transportation or green buildings, smart buildings. So there's going to be some folks there in the room that have visibility into a lot of different activities around the US and internationally that could be complementary to some of what we may want to try and do here in the region, both from the standpoint of collaboration across cities, but also companies and other resources that could be connected in. So shifting gears a little bit here, I just wanted to see if we have an opportunity to call forth a couple of other folks and see if they want to do a quick demo to kick us off so that we can also get a flavor for what's going on with another technology tool that we may want to consider in all of this. And then we can go into a facilitated discussion. So let me see here. What we do have is, I think, Riley, I'm wondering, do we have any of the folks on from a demo standpoint? Or actually, it's Justin now, isn't it? Justin, you on?
Nope, they're going to be a part of, I believe, the session at 11:30.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. So
if that's the case, then you've got them all set for 11:30? Because they were supposed to be on it for this one.
Oh, I think we made a mistake. They're on for 11:30.
All right. Well, if they're on for 11:30 and they're all set, then that's great. Okay. So shifting back then to OuterSpatial. So Jereme, I'm wondering, what are some of the things that you would like to see from the community as you're looking at, say, the work you're doing with the Intertwine and also some of the work you're doing with local government? You know, where do you see opportunities around some of these data assets?
let's see. Okay, cool. Yeah. One data set that is undervalued and pretty easy to collect is just points of interest. So either, facilities, what might be sort of available in parks, but also just things like water fountains and bathrooms that are not necessarily inside park boundaries, but are, located along popular routes that might go through the city. That's one that I always, when there's a good point of interest data set, it makes the experience much better. So that's a big one. I think there's still again, land managers can sort of have challenges like collecting those kinds of data sets. We're developing technology so they can give their visitors sort of challenges in terms of collecting data, and then it can get sort of passed back to them, embedded in a way that they're able to sort of then take it over as the authoritative content. We've already seen that sort of happening in LA County, especially that has already happened, where we've been able to sort of help facilitate the crowd sort of collecting data that is then sort of in a format and at a level of quality that the agency can then sort of steward from there on out. So yeah, that's a good one. Points of interest in terms of just what's out there for people to use.
Well, that's I think a really interesting one for sure. We've been having some conversations with the chief data officer for Oregon, Catherine Helms, and she's been involved in some of the design sprint efforts that are going on this week, as well as one we did back in early April. And out of that really came this focus around what would a data hub look like at a regional level that could be facilitated or supported in part by the state or by local governments in partnership. And what are some of the things that we could potentially add in to both public data from a private data standpoint as well, to kind of enrich the overall data set. And of course, thinking about that, there's a huge opportunity, I think, as we look at both what organizations like Metro and in the Portland region already have in terms of environmental data, and then we also think about what the state has as well. It's pretty fantastic. And what was intriguing was we started the conversation around agriculture data, and it turns out the Department of Ag actually has a ton of data that's incredibly valuable at the aggregate level to individual farmers and growers in Oregon. And they're like, well, they've already got the data. They're a trusted entity that we already supply our data to, and they could effectively share it back with the right infrastructure. And I think this whole supply-demand load balancing sort of question that came up in the previous session is a big one and a huge opportunity for the region as we think about how do we protect our assets here environmentally and not overwhelm them, but at the same time also get more people in a thoughtful way exposed to them and get access to them that's, in a way perhaps more inclusive than it's been done in the past. Very, very good. So it looks like we do have Saul and Julie from Fabric who are here. So I wanted to give a chance for them to do a quick demo of their solution, and then we can talk more about this issue of sort of data and supply demand, because I do think there's an opportunity here as we move into later parts of this week, given the interest from the state and Metro in this topic. All right, so Saul, will you be doing the presentation here?
I will, yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Skip, and hi, everyone.
Awesome.
We were tracking the wrong link, I think, so.
No worries. We had some confusion on our end, so we're all set now.
Perfect. Well, I guess I have 6 minutes here to give you the scoop on Fabric, which is my company. I'm joined by Julie Zwissler, who's also invisibly on the line here.
Hey, Julie.
So I'm gonna jump over into a quick, short presentation to kind of help bring this to life. Can you guys all see the woman in the yellow sweater?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So Fabric is a public messaging app in augmented reality. So I'm going to just tell you what that means. Basically, we created a social app in AR where you can discover and share public messages as thought bubbles overhead. So the idea here is to focus on human-centered technology, so designing tech to support the human experience and to imitate the human experience, where people could be out and about in their neighborhoods, in their communities, really thinking about what they need right now in real time and able to share a thought and able to put that as an actual thought bubble that others using their phone can look around, see what others are thinking nearby, and help each other out, start a conversation. And so we built this because society is seeing a terrible decline in social capital. Our social fabric is being frayed, and we want to connect people with real moments in real time. So there were several elements that came into understanding how this app could work for community. The first is who cares, and we believe that people who are curious are seeking connection in the moment and are looking for sort of an unvarnished view of the world, not a perfectly, curated Instagram feed, but really just connection with others nearby, our ideal focus area. And that's a perfect fit for a conversation on economic resiliency, because we know that when people connect in person, when they are in touch, they build trust, and trust is the bedrock of basically a functioning society. And so both personal and community well-being are dependent on our ability to work together. So the way the app functions at a high level is you'd be able to look up through your phone and see thought bubbles. So this is one when you arrive at the beach. Imagine being able to see who else is nearby. Here you could share a thought with an embedded photo or video, and those photos and videos are taken in real time. The comment section is really focusing on that thought bubble and starting a conversation around that individual's thoughts. Something, somebody wants to know where they can get some good food quickly. There are going to be lots of thoughts from others nearby about what makes sense. And then you're sort of navigating. So what's interesting is you're seeing these thought bubbles, and you're only seeing them from people right now within a half-mile radius of where you are. We originally designed the app pre-COVID, so we were thinking a lot about large events, college campuses, communities, co-working spaces where people could see thought bubbles of those nearby and start to build community. But with COVID, we're extending that radius, so you'll be able to see thought bubbles of people within a couple miles of you, and that'll help nurture a sense of community as you go about your day. So what does this look like in real life? So that's a quick glimpse of what AR on Fabric looks like. You could see that those thought bubbles hold, they're sort of constrained in space as you're moving around. You could turn your phone over, you can do all that. And I just wanted to sort of hit on a few quick concepts. I know we're pressed for time, but when we were designing the app, we were really focused on what replicates the human experience, what could actually nurture meaningful connection, build community, and what design choices do we have to make to really differentiate the product from sort of the online world that we all live in, and that give us this illusion of belonging, but also this sense of sort of disconnection socially as well. So a couple things sort of came to the front. One is users post ephemerally. So posts can last for 30 minutes to 8 hours. So it's not a permanent record. You're not making a commitment. You're not posting your dog video that everybody should see for all time. It's, I need to know where to get dog food. It's, what's the line at Trader Joe's like? Can anybody join me at the park in a socially distant way? Who wants to go for a walk right now? Anybody hungry, right? These are in the moment. These aren't like, neither on Twitter nor on Facebook would you actually share these things, because they're the stuff of life. They're the day-to-day stuff. It's in real time. So people are seeing what's going on right now, and that connects people. And I've mentioned the authentic, no filter nature of all the posts. You know, we also designed it so people could only post one thought at a time. This isn't about, you know, a tweet storm and spewing your ideas everywhere. It's the sort of responsible, respectful, you know, this is what I need right now. Anybody able to help out? There's no likes, no retweets, and actually no friends or followers. So people are sharing this, and it's available for all to see. And it's not a popularity contest. It's about sort of in the moment helpfulness and ideas. One of the things that we built with the technology that was the hardest thing we did, and also probably the most unique thing we did, is made it possible for the augmented reality thought bubble to move with you. So it is a GPS-based AR system. It's not just surface recognition. You're not placing posts on a surface or on, you know, top of my head. You're posting it and tethering it to your phone. So if I cross the street or I go across the neighborhood, it comes with me so people can follow my thought, just like living inside of a cartoon. Emphasizing place is really important, because it's where we are that we nurture community. And so seeing an AR is about what's proximate, but also even when you're seeing what's further away in what we call two-dimensional mode, you're still seeing how far away people are from you. So it's giving you a sense of distance, because we're all humans on a map, and we live in space. And finally, everything you say is public. This is public messaging, and it's meant to nurture a public discourse to some extent of respect and connection. So what we'd like to do for fun right now is invite all of you to go to your phones and download Fabric on the App Store or Google Play. It'll take you a second. Just search for Fabric Social AR or Fabric AR, and it'll show up as a small little thought bubble icon that'll look like a white background with a little red outline. I invite you all to go on there. And right now, with this community of, you know, nearly 20 people in this breakout, it would be really tremendous if we could all share, you know, an idea that you're currently working on, or ask for help. And then everybody's post default will be up for 2 hours, but you'll see how this medium nurtures connection and idea sharing instantly. So an example just in the blue box there for fun is, you know, community cleanup at 3 p.m. safety tips, right? And people can share ideas. But I'd love for everybody to ask a question or share an idea and spark a conversation. That's what we're all about. So I guess I'm going to pause the sharing here. The last slide is just my contact information. So that's not, that's the last slide, saul@sparkfabric.com. But I would love to basically do any tech support while you guys are downloading the app and sharing in real time here.
Yeah, I think what's really cool is having had a chance to look at the app. Like one initial thing that popped into mind for me was, you know, this perennial problem that most communities have, in Portland in particular. Like, we have really strong neighborhood associations and business districts, and they're often trying to figure out, like, you know, how do we connect with people who could have some subject matter expertise that are within a particular neighborhood or district. And, you know, whether it's a business with an issue or an individual who might be wondering, like, okay, does anyone here have like first responder certifications? Because at a neighborhood level, we're often trying to prepare for what happens in the event of an earthquake. We've got an all volunteer-led group of folks, but we don't know, frankly, who's in the neighborhood. And like, next door is is next door. I'll leave it at that. And so what I like about this is it's a little bit more like real-time ask and answer, and the serendipity of figuring out like, wow, I had no idea this person was like, you know, in my own neighborhood or in my own business district. That's so great. And I'm wondering, Jereme, too, if, you know, in hearing that, if you're seeing any sort of, you know, your wheels are spinning at all as it relates to like the campground issue in particular. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different sort of use cases there with people who are camping in the wilderness and might need access to someone within that particular campsite.
Yeah, what we've seen is what we do is we allow visitors to post. We have a social function where visitors can post a question or a photo of a given area, and it's tied to like a specific, either a point of interest in the park or a trail or just a whole area. Mm-hmm. And what we were really hoping would happen, which we've now seen happen, is the organizations communicating with the visitors through OuterSpatial around these sort of conversations that pop up, similar to where Fabric is sort of getting conversations to start based around like a location. We're seeing that happen with either between visitors, so visitor to visitor communication, but then adding the element of the organizations. So I think, you know, with Fabric, it would be really interesting to think about how our organizations, whether it's a, you know, a small business or a community group or a city government or, you know, a neighborhood association, like how are those groups like engaging with the conversations that are happening on Fabric, and what's their role? And because that's what everything in my world kind of comes back to, like, well, how are the organizations involved? Because those are our customers.
Yep.
And you know, we've seen it happen on our platform, and I think I'm always curious about any platform that's sort of like creating communications between people. Is what's the organizational component to it?
Yeah, so we have in the roadmap to this point a concept called threads, which would allow people to join a community that shares an interest. So actually, OuterSpatial, right, would be a great example of a thread where people are then interested in talking about camping and going out and being part of and hiking and what trails to do and who wants to go in real time. And they can filter out for people who are in their community. And we've been talking to lots of different organizations about creating those kinds of communities within the app. And I think that there's kind of a desperate need for that, because people aren't, you know, they can go online and get, you know, they can search the world of information, and they can also get feedback on questions like which bunk bed is better to buy and where's the best campground. But in the moment, you're kind of sitting there waiting for the forum response, right? And if you're in a community that knows, you know, check out Fabric for 2 seconds, give a bit of feedback. I like to compare it to having kind of a warm blanket. Like, that's what community feels like. It's like, you don't know who's going to respond. You might not even be that close to them, but they're part of your tribe and they're looking out for you. And that, the idea of offering something like threads where people can find common interests and be part of the same organization could really support that. And then we're also looking at offering Fabric as an embedded function within existing proprietary apps. So an AR experience within existing apps that brings community together as well. So we're sort of looking at deepening within different organizations and their communities in 2 different ways. So if
That's
you
awesome.
Thank you. And has anybody been able to get the app downloaded? Is it working? Are you finding it? I think everybody's on mute.
Yeah, if folks have questions or issues that they're seeing, or sort of comments they want to share about the app, feel free to do that over chat.
Absolutely.
And also wanted to point out that in terms of timing, so we've got about 5 minutes or so, 6 minutes remaining, and then Thomas posted the next session, which is focused on use of data in policing and police budgets, which should be very interesting and timely. That starts at 11:30. So definitely encourage folks to check that out. But in the meantime, now we've got like 5 or 6 minutes left. I think what would be interesting is to, see if we can come up with a couple of different use cases that we may want to share out towards the end of the week. But one thing that I'm definitely focused on as we head into Friday is here we have an opportunity with, and Saul and Julie, I'm not sure if you were on the portion of this early on, but I was mentioning that we have the state of Oregon is very interested in providing infrastructure for essentially a regional data hub that would enable a variety of different apps to kind of sit on the infrastructure, and local government, state government would effectively help promote the resource. But the state already has a lot of interesting infrastructure as it relates to tech from a hosting standpoint and otherwise, where essentially creating this, marketplace isn't the right word, but essentially like a way to house all these various apps and data would be really fascinating. And it came up originally in the agricultural context, but I think we have an opportunity to start to imagine what are some of these other next opportunities. And there's no reason why individual communities around Oregon, say for example Portland or Bend or Eugene, couldn't effectively pilot some interesting application using a mix of public data and essentially look at what might the relationship be between that effort and, say, a regional data hub as it gets going. Sorry, it looks like, Saul, there was let's see here.
I saw one comment on a Galaxy tab.
Okay.
Is it not showing up on the Google Play Store for that, or it's saying it's the AR, or maybe the AR core is not available? I'm not sure. And just to kind of give everybody just a final quick second of how the experience works in real life. When you create a post, so you're looking at my phone here, when you create the post, you just tap on the bottom, you create the post, and then it shows up as this thought bubble. And as I move my phone, that thought bubble holds steady, and I can even turn my phone upside, I can turn it side to side and it holds steady because it is actually an AR. And then you tap on it, and then you can comment and swipe through what other conversations are happening on the app right now. So that's the gist. I see you guys are 699. Well, Jereme's 699 miles away from me, which is good to know. But yeah, thank you so much for this. And if you do have any ideas or things you'd like to explore with the AR, everybody can easily reach me on by email, of course, and that is right here. I'm just gonna sort of give you my information. It's just saul@sparkfabric.com, or even by cell phone, 303-908-6730. We're happy to have a conversation about how Fabric might help out what you're doing on economic resilience and community building.
Awesome. Thank you, Saul and Julie, and also Jereme. We'll follow up with both of y'all in the sense that we're going to be putting together essentially a recap at the end of the week of some of the different companies and projects that have been featured. So it'll be a good chance for us to kind of get that out more broadly as well to our network. There's a lot of folks that are interested in sort of a variety of different tech that we're going to be featuring, and you never know where the next use case or aha moment is going to come. So we want to make sure that we can get you in front of as many folks as possible. So thank you for spending some time with us today, and we're going to now shift over to the next session for those who want to log in. It's a separate Zoom link. Thomas put it in the chat. So
thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And we hope to catch you all again for some of the programming later today and later on this week.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.